12 Redditors answer, what is the creepiest explainable non-paranormal story or event that happened to you?
This happened to my mom in the early 70s. My mom was deep asleep in the middle of the night, but something jarred her awake. In the darkness of her bedroom, she could see a strange man opposite her bed staring at her. She had no idea who this guy was, and was terrified because she was a single parent at the time and my older brother was in the next bedroom. He is about 3 years older. My mom calmly asked the guy who he was and what he was doing there. He informed her that he was the son of my grandma's friend and he just had to meet my mom. My mom decided that the best course of action was to treat this guy like a family friend and offered to make some coffee and brought him into the kitchen. She tried to make small talk with him until he left a couple of hours later after she told him she had to get to school in the morning. Fortunately, the guy left pretty easily. My mom thought for sure she was going to be raped and murdered by this guy. She never learned how he figured out where she lived, but as far as she knows, he never bothered her again. So when I was in high school, I had two neighbors across the street, a man in his 40s and what I assume was his mother, in probably her 70s. The mom was pretty clearly mentally ill. I'm not a doctor so I have no idea what was going on with her, but she wore plastic bags on her feet and she would always hobble outside with her walker, onto their grass outside and just yell random stuff. Typical mentally ill person, fear the devil this, the government that. Now she always had a walker, and I saw her use it for years. One day, I'm homesick from school and in the middle of the afternoon, she goes outside and starts yelling stuff, then returns inside. I was just about to grab the mail, but waited till she went back in. I'm at the mailbox and see the door open, so I try and make a quick exit and this woman suddenly throws down her walker and sprints at me yelling, "You're that little demon, you are that devil," and I bolt, make it into the house and lock the door. She stands outside peering into the front window for 2 hours while I try and get a hold of my parents. No cell phones at the time. Anyway, my mom went and talked to the son later that day. Apparently she was on new medication that was just effing her up and wasn't feeling pain, which is why she sprinted despite needing a walker. Or at least that's what he told my mom. Still scares the shit out of me though. I had a party at my apartment with my friends from college. We had music, beer pong, drinks. Typical party. Pretty low key, there were only like 12 of us, just looking for something to do on a Sunday night, since we had the Monday off. We live in a complex that is a bunch of rows of townhomes, and a huge parking lot. It was about 11:30 p.m., and there is a knock at the door. Figuring it was one of our neighbors, I opened the door. There was a very pale, skinny, bleached blonde girl standing there. She looked sickly, like a serious drug addict. She asked if any of us had a lighter, and my friend Nick gave her one. She walked into our apartment, and lit her cigarette in our kitchen, while everyone stood there silently and awkwardly, watching her. She stood there for a minute, looking around, then abruptly said thanks and walked out the door. Our window was open, and we saw her walk down the steps to the parking lot and get in a car directly in front of our window, watching us. There was another girl and a guy in the car with her, equally sickly looking. We laughed it off, and the party went on. Every so often, however, we would look out the window and the same car would be there. The people always watching us. This carried on until about 1:30 a.m. when the three got out of their car and knocked on our door again. Nick opened it to see what the hell they wanted. He's an extremely intimidating looking guy. The blonde girl said with virtually no expression, "We just wanted to know if we could come in. You guys look fun. Like, beer pong fun." We politely declined, since it was late and people would be leaving soon, and she got irate and started screaming at us that we were idiots. We closed and locked the door. They walked back to their car and watched us again. Everyone started to leave around 2:30 a.m. The only people left were my roommate and I, two 20-year-old females. The car was still there. Still watching. My roommate and I sat at the kitchen table, talking about what we should do, and the car started flashing their lights into our window, which went on for a few minutes. We shut the lights off and closed the blinds, but peeked through them to see what was going on. The car sat there for a few more minutes, then drove away. It was one of the most bizarre moments of my life. This happened when I was a college student living in an old building in Chicago. All of my roommates had left for the weekend and I had the place to myself. After a long evening, finally decided to go to bed for the night. I had just gotten under my covers and turned off the light, when I suddenly had the vivid sensation that someone was standing just outside my bedroom door. The actual door was open just a crack and I could feel a presence of some sort. The best way I can describe the feeling is like a sudden ringing in the ears, without any actual ringing. I've experienced this sensation often when people actually enter a small room without me actually seeing them do so. Anyway, the feeling of presence was so strong, that I actually believed one of my roommates had returned early. I called out the name of the roommate whom I suspected most of coming home sooner. I waited for a second and only heard silence. Then, while I was staring right at it, my bedroom door oscillated almost imperceptibly, then began to slowly open all by itself. The door opened about halfway and stopped. No way, though, to myself, with feelings of equal parts utter fascination and terror. I'm a huge skeptic of anything supernatural. At that point, I got out of bed and poked my head out of the doorway, not knowing what to expect. Nobody was there. I was the only living person in the house, I was certain. But from the living room, I could now hear it. Something on the other side of the apartment was softly moaning. The hair on my neck rose at that moment. I slowly crept down the hallway and peeked cautiously into the living room. It was only then that I saw it. The window in the far corner of the room was open just a sliver, and through that little gap, the wind was howling past. As it turns out, a low-pressure system moved in at that moment, depressurizing the house, causing the odd sensation in my ears, opening my bedroom door and the moaning in the living room. It was the moment in my life where I could have accepted a superstitious assumption or faced my fears with science. I'm glad I chose science. When I was in community college, I inherited the responsibilities of student editor of the campus newspaper. It was a 4-page dud of a thing, but it was nice to put on a resume and it paid cash money. Basically, it was just me and a supervisor running the show with various random students submitting. I ran into a lot of different characters with that job. Lots of nice kids wanting to submit art or movie reviews, that sort of thing. This one guy though, he was really serious about the whole thing. He was an older man that attended night classes. He was intense, edgy. He was just too much, you know? He would walk into my office and rant about this and that. His submissions were always really angry about the school or the government. You know the type, I'm sure. Once, I had to deny his submission because there was no way to edit it into something admissible. It was just too far out there. I told the guy we couldn't accept the article and he was livid. Left me a few really nasty messages on my campus voicemail. I was kinda just a kid, 19 years old. I had never dealt with someone so aggressive before, and I was a little scared of the confrontation of it all. I told my supervisor and he laughed it off. I showed him the voicemail and he told me point blank that I was too sensitive. About 2 months later, the guy who left the voicemail murdered another student out in the parking lot after class. Stabbed him in the throat with a buck knife over an argument. Sensitive, I guess. I was 14 and in the Boy Scouts, and we were on a canoeing trip down the Buffalo River in Arkansas. It was a 6-day trip, and it was just our little crew of about 10 boys and 3 adults. We had not seen anyone outside of our crew for days. We would canoe several miles and pick some random spots to sleep each night. This one night, me and a friend decided we were not going to sleep in the tent. We wanted to sleep in some hammocks by the river. I woke up sometime in the middle of the night, being eaten alive by mosquitoes, and decided that this was a stupid idea. I began walking to my tent that my tent buddy had set up, and was sleeping in without me. The field we'd choose to camp on that night was quite large, so the tents were spread out very far apart. I am walking by one of the tents and I see this shape huddled up next to it. I assumed it was the boy's backpack, but it was oddly shaped and could have been a person. It was very dark and I couldn't see. For some reason, I decided to kick it while I was walking past, to make sure it was just a bag. When I kicked it, it grunted in pain. It surprised the shit out of me. You must understand that we were in the middle of nowhere. Out in the wilderness. So my first thought was that Adam, the guy who was supposed to be sleeping in that tent, was outside of it for some reason. So I knelt down beside him and asked, "What are you doing out here?" The man replied, "I like you people." That's when my heart nearly exploded out my chest. This was a stranger. This was not Adam. Fear seized me. I noticed he had a knife in a sheath on his belt loop. I was trying my best to stay calm. I will never understand why I thought that I needed to get that knife away from him. I should have run screaming, but I didn't want to alarm him. I went to grab the knife and he grabbed my arm and said, "You need to go to bed." I said okay, got up and walked the remaining 100 or so feet to my tent. I woke up my tent mate damn near hysterical. Just knowing he was gonna come in any second and kill us. I woke him up and told him the story. He, being much braver than me, went out there, walked around, and came back saying he didn't see anyone. He thought I was making the whole thing up. At this point I couldn't even believe myself, so we just went back to sleep. Maybe it was just some weird dream or something. The next morning, he woke me up and told me the adults wanted to talk to me. I walk out the tent, and I can see people's stuff just strewn everywhere. Apparently, the guy, whoever he was going outside each tent and going through the backpacks looking for stuff to steal. One of the adults had an expensive camera missing. The adults went and searched for signs that someone else was on this part of the river, but never found anyone or anything. To date, that is the scariest moment of my life, and though I am 36 years old and my wife mocks me, I still sleep with a night light. When I was a teenager, probably 15 to 16, we lived in an old house that had many additions over the years. One of these additions was a large sunroom conversion at the back of our house, which was at second-story level, with an attached deck. One sweaty summer night, I was sitting in the back room, all of the windows thrown open, the back door open wide with our screen door locked, and it was around 2 to 3 a.m. I was watching TV and I started to get the weirdest prickling feeling on my neck. It felt like I was not noticing something important. Pure instinct. I got up and wandered into the kitchen, roamed the house for a bit, then gave up the ghost and came back. After about 10 minutes, I felt the same weird sensation, even more intense than the first time. Next door to us, the neighbor had a large barn that was converted into a 4-car garage with white siding. The direct line of sight, out the screen door from where I was sitting, was that side of the garage. As it happened, my neighbor had a son a little bit older than me, who had just gotten home. As he pulled into their driveway, the headlights illuminated the side of their garage, and for one brief instant the outline of someone standing on the other side of my screen door was thrown into sharp relief. I clearly saw a person staring at me. Naturally, I screamed at the top of my lungs, and I heard them thundering down the back stairs. My dad came running into the back room, carrying his handgun, and I couldn't even speak. I just pointed towards the back door and he ran outside after them. He didn't find anyone. I never sat out there at night without every blind closed and without the door locked again. To this day I still have issues with windows being open at night because of the uncertainty of what is going on outside. The second job I ever had was at a tiny, family-owned store, where there were never more than 4 employees at a time. For a fair amount of time, we had this creepy guy who would come in. His clothes were always clean, but his hair was always greasy, like he hadn't washed in a month. English wasn't his first language, and he had a pretty bad stutter, and he would occasionally spit on you as he talked. He would also come in and home and on my only female co-worker, making no effort to hide the fact he was staring at her chest whenever he spoke with her. I believe she said he never made eye contact with her in all the time he came in. One day, he stops coming in and we're all happy. About 2 years later, I'm working a new job one city over, and I run into the guy. He remembers me, and my coworker. He freaks me out, as he discusses my father and the cars he owns. I'm handicapped, and my father used to take me to work and pick me up from my old job. This dude had never come into the store anywhere near the beginning or end of my shift, so he had to have been keeping a watch on the store for some reason. Very unsettling. About 2 years after, that very same guy hires on as a temp worker where I work. What a luck. Stares at me constantly, and never says a word. I take down my name and personal stuff from my desk, so he can't learn any more about me. My boss and co-workers mock me for this. A few weeks later, before his project is done, the guy disappears from the office. Management absolutely refuses to talk about why he's suddenly gone, and at the same time, everyone stops making fun of me for being paranoid about him. It's been about 20 years since I last saw him, but if he did show up again it wouldn't surprise me. I'm still freaked out by this, but anyways. When I was 18, I lived at my girlfriend's house with her parents. It was a duplex, so we had neighbors right on the other side of the house. We had our room up in the attic, which was right next to the bedroom where this couple had their bedroom in. The only part of the house where the duplex directly connected was the crawl space. It connected these 2 attic bedrooms, but that didn't bother us. We didn't think there was anything to worry about. We find out 3 months later that this 40-year-old mother that lived in the attic room over was mentally unstable and would constantly crawl into the crawl space that led to behind our bed. She would record our conversations, every night. She would just sit there and listen to us, and record what we said, completely unknown to us, for 3 whole months. Apparently, she was obsessed with us and wanted to figure stuff out about us. We found out after she showed everything my girlfriend's mother. We stayed at my father's house for a while until they got evicted for not paying rent. Did a week-long travel trip for work and I stayed at a house from Airbnb. It was a decent neighborhood. 10 p.m., I decided to go out for a jog around the area when I noticed this male silhouette standing across the street looking at me. I thought nothing of it and kept jogging. Jogged about a mile later and stopped to stretch. I see the exact same silhouette standing across the street looking at me. What the F? How did he get there that fast? I thought he might have been following me jogging, but didn't sense someone running behind me. I jogged for another 2 miles, and looking back to make sure he wasn't following me, which I didn't notice he did, and then there the same silhouette again standing right in front. It's like he either flew or teleported. Eventually I stood still and he left gliding on the road. I noticed he was wearing very quiet rollerblades. I jogged back to the house and there he was again. He rolled up to me and we talked. There I found out he was a nearby neighbor and he was on neighborhood watch, indeed wearing rollerblades. I manage a women's plus-size clothing store in a mall. It's a kink, I get it. We actually get our fair share of creeps that hit on the girls while they're working. And we have a signal that they can make so that another employee knows to enter Youped and tell them they're urgently needed in the back room. There, they stay until the creep leaves. I was working by myself one morning, when a couple came in. Guy was in his mid-20s, but the woman was older, maybe early 40s. They are flirting wildly. He's treating her to a bunch of clothes. I help them find what they're looking for, but some of the items are not in stock in her size. I offer to have them shipped to her house, and they give me their shipping information. Afterwards, I tell them to have a nice day. The guy links his arm with mine, and suggests I come home with them and make it even better. I laugh it off and say that I'm not allowed to go with strangers. His partner says something like, "You really do have such a lovely smile, join us anytime," and he reminds me that I just took their address and I know where they live in case I change my mind later. All of that I could have ignored, actually. Less than 2 hours later, an associate comes in to help with the afternoon rush. She's in the back of the store and not immediately visible from the door. The couple returns and goes straight towards me, walking with purpose. Then catches sight of my coworker. The guy chuckles, says something about expecting me to be alone and leaves with his girlfriend. I turn to tell my coworker that was the couple that propositioned me, but my coworker is as white as a sheet and looks ready to throw up. I ask her what's wrong and she tells me. He had a gun tucked into the back of his shorts, and the woman had a knife up her sleeve. Because I was behind the counter and my view was blocked, I didn't see either. So last summer, I booked a glamping trip in the next county over. The website looked beautiful, a campsite of 6 large yurts outside a lovely little village. Coincidentally, I had driven through that village before as it's close to a really nice historic castle I like to visit occasionally. So we pay our money, and my husband, 2 kids and I pitch up. It's one of the last weekends of the summer, and it was lovely weather. The campsite was on a small hill, and the people who owned it lived on top of the hill in their farmhouse. We were checking in on a Sunday for 2 nights, as we were shift workers at the time. We passed other people checking out and they all looked happy. The owners of the site showed us down to our yurt, and mentioned that we were the only ones on the site for our stay this time, it being a Sunday. We were happy with that, to be honest, because with 2 young kids it meant they could make noise if they wanted, and we wouldn't disturb anybody. When she showed us around, she did say the yurt door didn't lock, but none of them did. Which okay, fine, because you don't lock a tent, right? The place was in its own mini wooded area and it was absolutely beautiful. The owner also mentioned that kids would be safe to wander, because they had perimeter fences due to their dogs. The first night was fun. We had a barbecue, the kids played and then went down to sleep about 8. I found it hard to sleep, but I often do somewhere new. There was only patchy phone coverage, so we read until we fell asleep. Next morning my husband seems a bit out of sorts, but I asked him if he was alright and he was all yep, fine. So I left it. We went out for the day and had a great time. Whole day was blazing hot and then we got back. Was washing up after dinner and the kids were playing. Then, a shadow came over the whole place. I felt eyes on me, and it went really cold. Honestly, it felt like something bad was going to happen. I felt dread hit me. We'd already paid to stay, but I pulled my husband to one side and said we have to leave right now. I don't know why. I've just got a bad feeling, please let's just go home. Normally he'd try and talk me out of something like this, but he didn't. He started getting the kids together and I packed our stuff. We went to the farmhouse where the couple who owned it sat outside playing with their dogs. My husband started loading up the car, while I apologized to them and explained we needed to leave because our youngest was feeling ill. They said how sorry they were about it, and then just as I turned to leave, the man owner asked if my husband had been outside the house last night. About 3 or 4 in the morning? I said no, he hadn't left my side all night. I would have woken. He asked me if I was sure. By this point, my husband was by my side, and answered that no, he hadn't. And why? Well, says the guy, the security lights came on and the dog started barking. When we looked outside, there was a man wandering around, who then turned around, and walked back down in the direction of the yurts. They assumed it was my husband. We both said it wasn't, and said our goodbyes quickly. I tore out of that place in the car, and then about a quarter mile down the road, my husband turned to me and said, "You were right, I was quiet this morning. I didn't say anything because I thought you'd take the piss. I wanted to use the bathroom in the wee hours, but as I was about to get up, I heard footsteps on the decking outside. Not hooves or something on 4 legs, something on 2 legs. I lay there as quiet as possible and hoped the kids wouldn't wake up or something."
If you enjoyed the video, please click the like button and subscribe to the channel. Hope to see you soon for a new compilation of scary and uncanny stories.